Hi, this is my presentation on the human brain and its functions. Up here I have a quote from Barry Gordon, who's a neurologist at Johns Hopkins, that says, "The brain represents 3% of the body's weight and uses 20% of the body's energy." I just thought that quote was kind of cool just because if it wasn't obvious enough already, our brain is very important to us. So the central nervous system is broken up into the brain and the spinal cord, and we'll focus on the brain. The cerebrum here is divided into two hemispheres, the right and the left. In between them is a structure called the corpus callosum. It's a band of nerve fibers that connects the two hemispheres and allows for communication between the both of them. So the cerebral cortex contains 4 lobes, and all these lobes function, or the entire cerebral cortex is where a lot of our higher, more complex functions occur. So here in the front is the frontal lobe. It is important in speaking and judgment and muscle movements, and within the frontal lobe you'll find the motor cortex, and the motor cortex is actually kind of right in the rear of the frontal lobe. It is involved with controlling our voluntary muscle movements on the opposite side of the body. And basically more precise movements will require or take up more space in the cortex. Then we have the temporal lobe, which is involved in auditory information processing. Then the parietal lobe, which is a lobe that will receive sensory information for our sense of touch and our orientation. And within the parietal lobe, you'll find the somatosensory cortex, which is kind of towards the front of the lobe. So this cortex processes our body's sensations. So our more sensitive body parts, our more sensitive sensations will take up more space in the cortex. And then lastly, we have the occipital lobe. And the occipital lobe is involved in processing information from our visual field. And then all the other space in the cerebral cortex is what is referred to as association areas. And over here on the side, I have a little bit more information on that. There's a really well-known myth that humans only use 10% of their brain, when that's not true at all. The reasoning behind this is when the brain would be probed in certain areas, there wouldn't be an actual physical manifestation, no observable output. So they assumed that nothing was going on there. But the thing is, association areas are not involved in primary motor or sensory functions. Instead, they're really important in learning and remembering and thinking and speaking. They will interpret and integrate sensory information with stored memories. So down here in this diagram, we'll see the older brain structures and structures of the limbic system. We'll start with the older brain structures. All of the structures of the older brain function without conscious thought. So they control things that we don't even think about. So this whole area kind of right here is what you'd refer as the brainstem. The brainstem is actually the oldest of the structures and is in control of our sort of automatic survival functions like breathing. The brainstem also includes the medulla, which is right here, and then the reticular formation, which is right here. And those two will actually organize sensory information that's coming in from the rest of the body, and then we'll relay it to the correct areas of the brain for processing. These two areas also control arousal. The thalamus, which is right here in the middle, let's start with this. The pons is involved in coordination, and it helps control our sleep. Okay, now the thalamus right here in the middle is what we refer to as like the sensory control center. It will take in any sensory information except for the sense of smell, and then we'll relay that information to the other parts of the brain for processing. Right here you have the cerebellum, and that's involved in nonverbal learning and skill memory. And the cerebellum and the pons together will actually help control voluntary movement. Now we have the limbic system, which is associated with our memory, our emotions, our drive. Not shown in this, but the amygdala is something that sort of influences aggression and fear. But it's important to note that our like sense of emotion doesn't just come from the amygdala. A lot of other parts of the brain are involved, so don't just think like one certain part of the brain controls this specific emotion. It doesn't work like that. So then we have the hypothalamus, which maintains our body's homeostasis. So it will help control our hunger and our thirst, our body temperature, even sexual behavior. The hippocampus, which is also not in this diagram, will process very specific memories, and it'll actually decrease in size as we get older. Lastly, I want to talk about the endocrine system right here. And the endocrine system helps regulate our hormones. And the reason why I really want to talk about it is because the master gland of the endocrine system is the pituitary gland, which is actually located right here. The rest of the endocrine glands are spread out throughout our body. So basically, the hypothalamus will release hormones that will tell the pituitary gland to tell other hormones in the rest of the body to release certain hormones. And that's my presentation.